So today we're talking about the Parmigiani Tonda PF Skeleton Graphite in rose gold. Originally launched in 2022, Watches and Wonders, so sometime April or maybe May. Alongside of its steel counterpart, the watch retailed for 88,000 Swiss francs in 2022, and today, as I'm making this video in 2024, it retails for 97,000 Swiss francs. So what do you get for close to $100,000? You get a beautiful case and bracelet in that warm rose gold. You get an automatic movement with 60 hours of power reserve in case you want it to sit out those weekends that you spend on the beach. But in case you do want to take the watch with you to the beach, it offers 100 meters of water resistance. Pretty cool. Now what you're seeing here is a modern and a very beautiful take to skeletonization, featuring a what I would call contemporary architecture, filled with techniques that also speak to traditional watchmaking. So you're not getting like all modern and no traditional, right? Now that being said, this could be considered a sports watch due to the bracelet, the aggressive looking movement. But here in gold, I think it is a very classy, very dressy piece, very suited for a formal night out, but I think you could pull this off on the beach as well. What I think really makes this watch formal and more dressy is that monochromatic gray themed graphite movement, very toned down, not flashy at all. I do want to talk about the historical releases of this watch first. So in 2022, Parmigiani released two versions of the Tonda PF Skeleton, as I mentioned earlier, rose gold and in steel. Now I already talked about the gold, but the steel retailed for 59,000 Swiss francs at launch in 2022. Today's retail price is 63,500 Swiss francs. What I think is really cool about the steel piece is that it's the only version that has all metals incorporated into it. So sure, you got the steel case, but the bezel, the knurled bezel on the steel piece is in platinum. You've got rose gold hour indices and hands, and you have the solid 22 karat rose gold rotor as well on the steel version. And I think it's very cool that Parmigiani opted to have a platinum bezel on the steel piece. It's a small touch, but it's very premium feeling and perhaps teasing us with the release of the all-platinum version that came out earlier this year, with a retail price of 117,000 Swiss francs. So let's talk about the case and the bracelet first. The case is made by Les Artisans Boîtiers in La Chaux-de-Fonds, pardon my French. It is a three-part case, so you have the case back bezel, the midsection, and then the main bezel of the case. And then you have four welded lugs that essentially make it a 7-part case. It is in solid 18 karat rose gold, so is the bracelet. The watch is 40 millimeters with an 8.5 millimeter width. The crown has a diameter of about 4.3 mm and is threaded. It's really cool that I think that the crown itself is about half the width of the watch. It's a screw down crown, which is where you get that 100 meters of water resistance from. The logo on the crown is relief engraved, I assume by machine, or yeah, probably by machine, not by laser. The surface of the crown is polished, as well as the PF logo. The case has three kinds of finishing, as you can see here. You have polish, satin brush, and then knurling, and we'll come back to the knurling in a bit. The case features the signature teardrop Tonda lugs that make it very comfortable. They curve very delicately to kind of hug the wrist. As I mentioned earlier, the lugs are welded into the case, making this a very traditional, very old school way of making watches. The lugs are beveled as well. They have beveled edges, as you can see here. And you can see where the bevel starts, from a very delicate edge to a more pronounced one, as we move away from the center of the case towards the beginning of the links. It's very striking and very beautiful. You can see the lovely polishing as well, where the lugs meet the center of the case here. The bezel has polished sides here, as you can see, that seem to be rounded towards the center section of the case where I'm pointing my finger. Then you have knurling. Then you have a polished bit with a slight upwards angle, and then finally a flat top bezel. Very nice to see these different kinds of techniques incorporated just into the bezel. Historically, each individual groove was done manually by a process that involved applying specially formed steel wheel to the bezel to create the grooves. Now, on older Torics, for example, I know that this is a Tonda, but hear me out. On older Torics, there were about 140 grooves per bezel. Like, imagine 140 grooves per bezel, all done by hand. Today, a CNC machine called the HM-800/Y handles this whole process. So essentially, today you just place a ring in gold or silver or whatever into the machine, and then it spits out this fully finished bezel, which I think sucks. It is not as romantic as it used to be, but this is just how it is. I think it's very disappointing, and I'm not sure when this changed, but I suppose that Parmigiani had to meet customer demands. I don't think it was feasible anymore to do this whole knurling by hand. It is a very artisanal and very painstaking, labor-intensive process. So it's upsetting that this is how it is, but anyways, moving on. So moving on, let's talk about the case back bezel, because this is something that is very impressive. So the case back bezel has a very cool triple concave all polish finish. So you have a concave bit there, and then finally another one there. So essentially the side rim, you have the angled center, and then a downward angle that connects to the sapphire. Moving on to the bracelet, you have a fully integrated 3-link bracelet that tapers, as you can see here. So this is keeping in theme with the Tonda styled lugs, maintaining that easy to wear kind of theme or aesthetic. The links are also short to kind of mid-size, so very nice on the wrist. They curve quite easily, like even, this is an extreme example, but you get the point, right? The bracelet also has 3 different kinds of finish. So as you can see, you have the satin brushed center links. You have some polishing over here, which we will come to. And then you also have sandblasting here on the clasp. And this is a sequential clasp, so you have to do one side before the other. It is a independent spring system for each button, as you can see. You have some sandblasting here where the logo falls into place. I think it's very interesting to see how the brand plays with the different kinds of finishes on the bracelet. On the outer side links, let's call them, you can see how it starts out from as early as the lugs, with both polished and satin brush surfaces, as if fighting for territory, with the polished having the majority and then the brushed making a comeback with let's say 50% of the surface area, and then finally slowly converging into a single polished finish, which I think is really awesome. As early as the lugs again, the bracelet also features bevels on its outward-facing sides and corners, as you can see here. However, the inside of the bracelet is very sharp and crisp, maintaining only a single kind of satin brush finish, almost as if to tell the wearer that on the inside we must stay calm, reserved. We must neither project nor reflect, whilst allow many different personalities to surface on the outside, depending on our surroundings. Smells like cheese, I know. Let's talk about the sapphire crystal. So the sapphire crystal is treated, actually it comes from a company called Arunic. So this is a company that creates sapphire crystals and AR coats them. This is one of the very few pieces of the watch that are not made in-house. Now, why Arunic? So Arunic is made by a third-party Swiss company called Econorm. And why Parmigiani decided to use them, there's a few reasons actually. So Arunic sapphires provide 97% light transmission through to the dial. Well, in this case, the lack thereof. They also have achromatic properties, which completely eliminate that green or blue hue that you get on a lot of watches. They also have hydrophobic and oleophobic properties, which allow them to resist smudges and oils. As you can see, like I am just rubbing, and looks fine. Interesting to see technology applied to the watch. I mean, in some cases, I would have preferred something more traditional, like have this bezel, this beautiful bezel, hand knurled. But I think it's interesting to see that some technologies do provide benefits in terms of, like, let's say the sapphire crystal. So let's talk about what we can see on the dial. Keeping in theme with the Tonda of simplicity, the indices are applied in 18 karat rose gold, as you can see here. The indices are sat on a multi-finish alternating 3-step 2-part rehaut. Now, I know that sounded like a mouthful, but let's go through them one by one. So looking at the rehaut, you have a sandblasted outer rehaut ring. You have a vertically finished satin brushed applied ring. And then finally, you have a sandblasted texture again, but this time at an angle. Now, I suppose it's a single part with just the applied brushed ring on top, but I don't have the tools or the knowledge to confirm that. It reminds me of the same alternating style that you see here on the bezel, you know, that 1, 2, 3. The indices also follow this angle down off of the rehaut, although not to the same degree angle of the ring. Here's something to show you what I mean. They cut off sharply in the middle with a delicate vertical straight cut, and then they taper down across the aforementioned angle to cast like a small shadow on the 3rd step of the rehaut, like almost as if they are floating. The indices are mirror polished with sharp angles with no bevels. The mirror polishing seems to be present on all sides, including the central pivot facing facets as well as the inner rehaut facing sides. You have delta-shaped hands that are also skeletonized and apparently in rose gold, but I can't confirm this. So I've seen some people claim that the hands are in solid rose gold. I've heard others claim that they are plated. I don't have any official communication from Parmigiani to confirm or deny those claims. The hands are actually delicately convexed across what looks to be a flat surface at first glance. Their edges are polished and beveled by what looks to be by hand. including the inner part that is also skeletonized. So like even that part there is also beveled by hand. The interior part of that is also beveled by hands. The central pivots, the central pivot point of the hands also are rounded with polished rims. Very, very cool. The PF logo at 12 is engraved by machine, and here you can see why I said that it was engraved by machine. You can see those little tracks. I'm not sure whether the finishing on top is electroplating or gilding or gold filling. I'm not sure how they've done that exactly or what material they've used, but nonetheless, that's what you have. Let me just change the time. There's a great contrast of gold on graphite, and I think that this makes it a very legible watch. Now let's use our imaginations for a minute, right? Picture a skeletonized watch that has skeletonized hands, and I'm pretty sure you are picturing a watch that is very illegible. Parmigiani did a really great job with the design here. I mean, like digging deeper, the different finishing and the use of polished hands on brushed bridges also play a role in making a stronger contrast with that slight pop. It not only makes it more legible, but it makes it a true pleasure to the wearer who may only like want to casually glance at the time, but find themselves lost in this beauty of polished on brushed surfaces. Coming back to the hands, so you have only 2 hands for hours and minutes, and again in theme with the Tonda's simplicity kind of theme for design. But interestingly enough, the movement hacks. Now, I personally think that this is a very cool thing for those who want to set their watches accurately. But I think that this was unintentional, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. The movement is an in-house caliber PF 777. Now, from a little digging, it looks very similar to the PF 770 found in the Tonda PF Sport and the Tonda PF Automatic. A telltale sign that this is a reused caliber is that the watch has a hacking feature but no seconds. This is just speculation, but like I think if I had to guess, that's what the movement is based off of. Regardless, let's talk specs. You have a 30 millimeter movement, or 13 1/4 lines for those more sophisticated than myself. The movement is only 3.9 mm thick. You have a power reserve, as I mentioned earlier, of 60 hours coming from a skeletonized double barrel system. It runs at 4 Hertz or 28,800 vibrations per hour. You have 144 parts in the movement, but some claim higher, I think at 187 parts. And I can only assume here that Parmigiani is not counting all the parts of the movement, the, let's say, decorative only parts. So maybe the hour indices, some of the screws, some of the non-functioning pieces. You have 29 jewels, and you may be asking, where are the jewels? We will come back to them in just a moment. The overall aesthetic of the movement gives you a very toned down and a sober aesthetic, monochromatic gray, different shades, different finishes of gray. You have base plates that are sandblasted. You have bridges that are all vertically satin brushed, and some of the movement parts are actually coated in rhodium. To achieve this grayed out kind of look, what Parmigiani has done, I mean, this is a standard brass movement, but it has been NAC coated. So NAC is nickel anthracite coating. What you would do is basically you would have a brass movement, like the one in here, and you would electroplate that brass movement with nickel. And voila, that's all there is to it. The jewels also emphasize this monochromatic toned down look. So 29 jewels but they're all transparent, and most apparent you can see here on the balance wheel end stone or capstone. I think on the back it may be more visible. Yeah, there. So I'm not sure if they used rubies or sapphires, colorless or colorless rubies. I'm not sure which stones exactly they used. But I think it's very cool that Parmigiani decided to kind of stick to that theme. No red, not too much of a pop. Yes, you do have gold hands. Yes, you do have gold indices. Yes, you do have the PF logo at 12 in gold. But no red, no pop, like nothing overly flashy. It's just a very modern way of expressing a skeletonized dial. I think this is very, very cool. In fact, the only two stones that are red are the two on the pallet fork, but even that is kind of hidden. So like, now while the watch is monochromatic and very modern, the grooves between the bridges and the curves and the lack of sharp, straight, geometrical angles make this watch feel very traditional, very soft, in sharp contrast to what the colors would lead you on to believe. Almost like a river is flowing through the movement. And if I could just test the water resistance, maybe I could help you visualize that river. But again, the owner would not let me do this. Through the skeletonization, you can see some of the moving parts in action. You can see the gears turn as I wind the watch. You can see the mainsprings in the barrel and the double barrel system, coiling and tightening. Giving you a very kind of raw visualization of the power reserve. You can see the clutch system as I pull the crown out. And you can see that hacking mechanism over here. Oof. You can see the gears turn as I change the time. You can see the minute and hour pinion wheels, I guess, if you want to call them that. You can see one side of the pallet fork, which is mirror polished, as you can see here. A bit of the escapement, which is also mirror polished. Part of the balance wheel. And most of these parts are hidden, and I'm not sure if this is just by design or just a happy mistake, but it does, again, speak to the design cues of this monochromatic gray and toned down look. It makes sense to have everything partially hidden. Hidden enough to tone down the watch, but slightly exposed to kind of like show traditional watchmaking. Another thing that you can see, although it'll be very difficult to get here, you can see the underside of the rotor, which is actually finished in perlage. Right there. The balance wheel, as far as I can tell, is a Glucidur balance wheel in silver color, as to not break the monochromatic design philosophy of the watch again. It is smooth on the outside with inertia weights on the inside, sat atop of the spokes. The inertia weights, I assume, are made out of white gold. They could be tungsten. But I think Parmigiani would have opted to use gold on this watch. The balance also features a double-sided silver-colored shock absorber that just by looking at it seems to be from Inca block, and I would assume that the spring on top is in brass plated with rhodium to match the rhodium coated parts on the movement as well. Again, this is just a guess. I'm not sure 100%, but if I was to guess, that's what I would say. Speaking more about regulation, as you can see here, it has a simple screw system for regulation. Turning the screw would increase or decrease the effective length of the hairspring, and this would allow for fine-tuning, so either to make the watch go faster or slower. Parmigiani is also not shy to have the Vaucher stamp on the caliber, denoting its provenance. Now we can argue all day if this in fact counts as in-house or not, but like Parmigiani is also owned by the Sando family, Sando, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, by the Sando family. I assume Sando. Sando. So we can argue about whether it's in-house or not, but like the family and effectively the brand owns Vaucher at this stage, so it's hard to say whether this truly counts as in-house. Another thing that you may have noticed, I mean, this is a Vaucher, right? So that kind of look, that kind of theme, you've seen it in Richard Mille watches, which also have Vaucher watches, Vaucher movements. You see it in some Hermes watches that also have the same kind of look, aesthetic, maybe even to a certain degree the architecture as well. Hermes also owns 25% of Vaucher as I'm making this video, and I think Vaucher and Parmigiani are both up for sale. Talking about the finishing, you have lovely, lovely beveling across all the bridges. Nice and thick, none of that slim stuff. This is good, proper, decently done, meticulously done, very labor intensive, proper beveling. You have some interior angles over here and over here. Very impressive. I'm sure you have mirror polished screws, so the screw heads have been polished, the sides are also polished, the rims of the screws are also polished, they've been rounded out. The slots in the middle where you would put the screwdriver are also like beveled, like those edges are beveled as well. Like very unnecessary, very cool, very nice. Though as nice as the finishing is on this watch, I would think that it may leave some purists with a bit to be desired. Now, for example, right, although the jewels in the backside of the watch have polished, beveled countersinks, right, none of the jewels in the front receive that same treatment. The screws also back and front receive the same kind of like machined circular finished slot. Like they don't have these highly polished countersinks that you see on the back, on the jewels on the back, which I think kind of sucks. But like, I mean, if you were gonna do it to the jewels, do them to the ones on the front and the back, right? Another thing that I want to mention are the two cutouts here, one at let's say 7:30 and one let's say at 11. They're beautifully done, I mean from an architectural standpoint, okay? And they highlight the true kind of Swiss savoir-faire in doing the extra unnecessary to produce something beautiful and like really good looking. But under a loop, as you can see here, it is clear that only the outer part of the ring has bevels, while the inner part of the ring seems to have tracks of the CNC machine that made the cutout on the bridge. Slightly disappointing, but I do understand that they weren't going for like uber high-end finishing. Like that wasn't, I mean, like you're not buying a Kari or a Recep Recepi. Like you're getting a Parmigiani. This is a watch that is available, that is produced in larger quantities, and yeah, I guess that wasn't what they were going for. I mean, another thing, right? Like, so even here, like there are quite a few interior angles that I am showcasing as we speak, but I mean, there were places where they definitely could have added more. They could have added more sharper corners, but they decided quite literally to cut corners instead. Moving on to the rotor. Okay, I'm just gonna freeze here. So the rotor is a skeletonized rotor in solid 22. I said I was gonna freeze, I didn't. In 22, 22 karat gold. It has the Parmigiani logo on a sapphire plate. I think that is very unnecessary. You can see, in fact, that it is a sapphire plate as I am playing with the light. Very unnecessary, and I think awesome. Like, this is the attention to detail that we would expect at this price point. So, talking about that logo in sapphire, so it's basically a logo that is set into the sapphire. Now, I don't know how exactly it has been set into the sapphire, but like I believe that this is a dial technique traditionally, but it's applied on the rotor. So while that may be a highlight, there are some other aspects of the rotor which I also find very cool. Other than the underside of the rotor having perlage, which I mentioned earlier, which I will never get on camera. Aha, there it is. You also have the arc of the oscillating weight sandblasted. The text is in relief style and it's polished. The sandblasted surface is also surrounded by a single direction satin brush rail of sorts. The outward facing side of the arc also follows that same kind of satin brush finish, as you can see here. It's a very smooth, very harmonious kind of flow. The same can be said about the opposite side of the rotor arc, but I'll have to show you with a loop or with... The spokes of the rotor are high polished and rounded, so not straight flat spokes. None of that, please. Give us some good high polished rounding. The central part of the rotor also has a kind of a cup design with the base and the side of the inner body in satin brushing, and the top with a two-step surface in the same design of the rotor main weight, with a sandblasted surface surrounded by by satin brushed rails around the inner and outer lip of the cup. The central pivot of the rotor also has a ball bearing cover cap here that has the sunburst kind of finish held together by 3 screws. Again, with the same kind of like high polish, mirror finish flat surfaces and polished rims and chamfered slots, like all the good stuff. And if you look really carefully, you can see the tiny white cream colored ceramic ball bearings. Pretty cool. And that's about it. Hope you enjoyed. Catch you guys next time.